Hey traders, welcome to Charts and Coffee. Hope everyone is having a good Wednesday morning. I've got my favorite coffee back in the mug, and we are preparing for FOMC meeting minutes today. What that means is we've got to look at a little bit more detail about the meeting that just happened, right? So these are the meeting minutes. Are they important? Well, what we're going to be looking for is whether or not the meeting minutes are in alignment with the meeting and the press conference with Jerome Powell. And if they're not, we're going to have to make some adjustments. So what kind of adjustments could be made? Not that we're predicting what's going to happen, but at 2 p.m., if those meeting minutes are a little bit more hawkish, the idea here is to use that 2 o'clock timing to potentially grab some swing trades, meaning if there's enough volatility, maybe we get those pullbacks from some of the levels that we're looking at right now into the price movement range, into that daily gray zone right here, or maybe even the hourly. So it's not as if we change the watch list. It's still looking at where the relative performance has been. But now we're telling ourselves, well, if a 1 hour or a daily being a longer time frame has better shock absorption, right? That's what 2 o'clock is going to be, a shock. If it has better shock absorption, then those moves that might be really big and outsized and tough to manage risk on a 5-minute time frame, they could be far more useful on the 1 hour or the daily. And that's really a timing consideration for swing trades, right? What is going to be the catalyst to get us to the zone? And so that's really what today I'll have mostly in mind. Now, it's not as if we may not be able to day trade any symbols. There very well might be. Yesterday, we had a quick trade in Merck. Would love to continue to find a handful of swing trades every morning. But remember, the closer we get to 2 p.m., the focus gets to really two things. The closer we get to 2, the focus gets to the FOMC. The closer we get to the close, we start to think about other high impact events. So let's jump on over there for a moment. Bear with me. Let's jump on over to another economic calendar that I like to use a lot, and that is the economic calendar around earnings over at Estimize. This is a site called Estimize. This is where I look at, track, put a list of all the events from a stock earnings perspective that I need to be aware of. So even though I don't have any skin in the game in NVIDIA, if you watched yesterday's free video, you know that I'm far more interested in a whole lot of other names within the SMH. But considering the SMH is about 20% weighted in NVIDIA, the movement in NVIDIA could either launch SMH into the stratosphere along with a lot of those other stocks like Qualcomm and Texas Instrument and AVGO and a number of other uptrends, or if for whatever reason NVIDIA moves lower. Again, I'm not making any kind of trade based on guessing which way it moves, but I want to know if that's the domino that's going to fall. Now, I don't mean fall as in moving lower, but the catalyst is going to be NVIDIA. What other things around NVIDIA could be better setups that need that volatility to close the distance to that daily price movement range? And Qualcomm's been a big one, and I'm going to continue to track that. So you can see there NVIDIA after the bell today. So between FOMC meeting minutes at 2 and then after the bell, we've got NVIDIA. Again, remember, think about weighting. Where is that going to land? Of course, the NASDAQ, to a lesser degree, the S&P 500, to a massive degree, the SMH. So if we can capitalize on that volatility, great. So that's where we sit here on Wednesday morning, waiting for some pretty significant data. We don't have to trade it. And just because the FOMC meeting minutes are coming into play doesn't mean that there's going to be necessarily a trade in bonds. We simply know there's going to be volatility. And I definitely do not trade earnings, but we must respect the impact that earnings could have on the other stocks, like I mentioned, Qualcomm, that I am interested in. In fact, our last trade in semiconductors was taking advantage of this beautiful move higher in Qualcomm. So yeah, I want to jump on something that's already been out of range and showing that there's a lot of strength. So here's NVIDIA, not as strong as, say, Qualcomm has been the last, say, month and a half, but you can see here that if for whatever reason NVIDIA were to trade lower, whether that be Darvis support, whether that be daily price movement range support. There might be an opportunity if it launches straight up from here. Well, we'll wait for the next opportunity. All right, so that's what's on the radar. Let's go ahead and jump into our questions. First up is the QQQ. Line Watcher asks, at what level is the QQQ buyable on a pullback? All right, so that means we actually start the conversation, Line Watcher, at the NQ. And what that means is the NASDAQ futures, which is trading 23 hours a day, is the best look into what we'll see into QQQ, or even the quadruple Qs, or any variation of the NASDAQ mini futures that we have here. So for me to really like Qs, I would love to see a move. The useful move would be down to about 18.5. Now, at the bell in about 23 minutes, we'll get today's daily price movement ranges, meaning what are the price movement ranges that would apply to the 1 hour time frame for me and the daily. But frankly, daily price movement ranges can be used on any time frame, really, I would say greater than 1 hour. So 1 hour or greater, and up to the daily. So if you like a 1 hour chart, if you like a 2 hour chart, if you like a 4 hour chart, if you like the daily, those are all going to be perfect for the DPMR. And so again, at 9:30, I'll get all those levels. And if we can trade down, ideally with the volatility of 2 p.m. Eastern, that would be what I'm looking for QQQ. And it's a pretty decent size pullback, right? It's 300 points of the NAS undoable. Oh gosh, no, that's very reachable, but we need the catalyst for it. Now, here's the other challenge. Let's say I do get a trade on NQ at 2 p.m. The problem is it's got two hurdles to have to overcome. One is, of course, is there a setup at 2? But the second one is going to come after the bell. And that's going to be whether or not NVIDIA beats or misses, whether it moves up or moves down. And remember, NASDAQ, more so than any of the other major indices, more so than the Dow, more so than the S&P, of course, more so than the Russell, that's going to be where it lands. So if NAS pulls everything down, this is going to be no exception. So remember, it is buyable on a pullback, but it's really going to depend on whether you want to take advantage of a pullback that, say, the minutes triggers, or whether you want to take advantage perhaps on NQ futures, which are, of course, trading after 4 p.m., unlike the QQQ, really. Think about really any stock, any ETF, and the options on them, a 9:30 to 4 window. So after 4, I'll look at the NASDAQ futures. So it depends on which catalyst, right? But it's the daily price movement range regardless. All right, next up, Smoke asks, how do I feel about TSM? So Taiwan Semi. Well, actually, I alluded to the semiconductors. Yeah, that's a great question. Let's jump into SMH. All right, so what this is here is a layout. This is how I scan, gang. I put all those high concentration weighted stocks in order of their weighting on a layout like this. And what this allows me to do really easily is take a look at the individual structure of each one of these stocks and then determine, hey, what would I ideally like to buy? You know, what if pulling back, TSM, TXN, Qualcomm, AVGO was in an uptrend, but you'll see now it's in a neutral trend. So really the two that I'm most interested in would be TSM and TXN. Now, both of them are moving higher in a trend. So I like the idea of, even if NVIDIA and SMH pull them down, their general direction has been up. And the idea is an uptrend that pulls back is more likely to continue after that, right? Swing trading, a trend, or trend trading more specifically, is really continuation trading. That's really what it is. So a trend has a higher likelihood of punching up to higher highs and keeping higher lows. A trend also has better resiliency after a pullback to resume the trend that was. And so that's why I'll look at those. They're just better positioned to continue to move higher even after a move. Now, are there other names here that I would look at? Yeah, Qualcomm would be another one. You know, we mentioned that before. So Qualcomm, TSM, TXN, that would be my top 3. And if you ask yourself, Rog, I like a lot of the names here, right? I would love to buy NVIDIA. I like the way most of these stocks are moving. That's where you'll take advantage of the tide, right? If there are enough trends in the high concentration weighted side, right? The top 4, top 5, top 6 names of an ETF. If there's liquidity in that ETF's option chain, then I'll go with the ETF. So I'll play the tide instead of an individual boat. And that's not a bad idea either when you consider 3 of the top 6 are in uptrends and the other 2 are not exactly bearish. Probably the worst looking stock here in the top 6 is ASML. That's about as bad as it looks. And even that looks like it wants to perhaps set up a momentum breakout. You can see that narrow Darvis. You can see that narrow range, the neutral candles there. So that's the way I would pick that apart. And again, the whole idea is when I'm looking at any individual stock, what is the probability that it will continue? And that really comes down to the heart of everything I do. Is it a relative outperformer, right? Is it a relative outperformer? And that means when I compare other stocks in this group, and they're stuck with each other, right? They're stuck with each other because they are included in this SMH ETF. So that's where the relative part of relative performance kicks in. All right. And that really is a big part of what the Sector Secrets Mastery is all about. All right, so let's jump back on over to the charts. And next up is the Dow. So again, gang, DIA, QQQ, SPY, IWM, they're all going to start at the futures contract level. So DIA means, do I have a setup on the YM? Remember, the YM's been moving and grooving for, it moves and grooves 23 hours a day. It's been moving and grooving since the Asian session, the European Open, the UK Open, the Asian close, the pre-market in the US. So the best way for me to get a jump, a read, a really accurate one in the Dow would be that. Now, one of the things we have to remember is, I love that Smoke Divine mentioned Taiwan Semi on the 1 hour. Let me go back there for a moment, because remember, gang, as important as the symbol is the time frame. So in the case of the daily price movement range on the 1 hour versus the daily, they're in the exact same zone. But I would say, in terms of Smoke Divine's question, I would favor the daily again for that shock absorption. So, not knowing what time frame you're looking at there, Java. And gang, remember, anytime we're talking about a symbol, it's not just a symbol. It's what time frame, what time horizon are we thinking as well? Do we want to day trade it? Do we want to short-term trade it in terms of a swing? Do you want a longer-term trade it in terms of a swing? Or maybe this is something that is at a wish list level for your position portfolio and you're looking at it for the next few months. That time horizon is the big difference. All right, so Fernando asks, Cat, on the daily, thank you. All right, so daily Caterpillar. Fernando, I'll go up 1 notch to the XLI. And what I want to make sure is CAT a relative outperformer? Of all the things that I could trade in XLI, is CAT the one that I see has the best possibility of follow through and resilience? Aside from that, yeah, Fernando, I will wait for a pullback. And if we get that with the 2 p.m. hot zone, great. The cool thing about CAT is, if it lands in the daily price movement range at 2 p.m. or after 2 p.m. or sometime into the close, into that 2-hour window, when NVIDIA comes out, CAT, of course, could be affected by a general risk appetite or a general risk aversion, but it's much further away from that narrative around NVIDIA. So daily price movement range, and definitely I like the idea for the long on the daily. So thanks for the question. All right, next up is Dav asks, is Microsoft prime for a daily buy? Microsoft is going to be affected by NVIDIA in that your top 3 names in the XLK are Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA. And so, yes, but please remember, if NVIDIA, for whatever reason, moves lower, let's say the catalyst hits at 2 o'clock and we can buy Microsoft in the daily price movement range. Beautiful. But we have to then have a higher risk tolerance for Microsoft, even though it's not the one with earnings today. So if there is resiliency in XLK, actually, let's take a look at XLK for a moment. We looked at semis. How does XLK look? All right, so here are the top weighted names. I would say, if we're just talking watch list building, right? Not what can we do with Microsoft, but just general watch list building. I'd have to say Apple is at the top of that list. And whether or not it's Apple or whether or not it's Microsoft, both are going to be affected by Nvidia, but Apple has a little bit better structure. And this is a big part of what trading is, not what will I do on a certain stock, although I do like Microsoft. Could Apple be a better choice, right? Could Apple be a better choice in terms of the follow through because it does have the trend? And I hope that resonates because, one of the things I mentioned in the Friday video was, let's take the Nvidia earnings out of it. And most of you know, if you're logged into Charts and Coffee and you've been doing so for the past few years that we've been doing this every morning, I hate earnings season. It's a lot of noise that disrupts trends that otherwise would not be disrupted because we're getting this intense interest in how a company does every 90 days. Just the thought of that is absolutely ludicrous. But, look, we trade the markets we have, not the markets we want. Now, if you were with me in this office and we were doing this instead of 2024, 2004, it wouldn't be as much emphasis on earnings. Earnings have become a spectacle. They really have, and not for the betterment of traders and not for the betterment of investors. However, it's the reality. So if you're looking for follow through, again, take earnings out and you compare Qualcomm and Nvidia, and you're looking at a game of trade this, not that. Qualcomm is the better name. Now, of course, Nvidia could take off, but let's talk about everything up until May 22. Up until May 22, Qualcomm's been outperforming. So don't let the earnings side of things take your attention away. It's an opportunity cost, right? Take your attention away from something that is moving and in a way that's showing the follow through is there. So yeah, thanks for the question on Microsoft. In a game of trade this, not that, I'd probably favor Apple, but it's a good looking stock. I completely agree, but Apple, Microsoft, and the rest of that XLK bunch will be affected by whatever happens after the bell today in NVDA. All right, a couple other things before we wrap up here. Please do keep in mind that while we still do have mostly risk appetite, everything's been moving sideways, probably waiting on the two things we're going to get today, FOMC meeting minutes and NVIDIA. And you'll see that sideways action on ES and on NQ. Confusion, uncertainty, a lack of risk appetite, all those things do favor defensives, right? So it kind of seems weird on a day where XLP and XLU might be near the top of my list, even though NVIDIA's got earnings coming out. I don't want to deal with that. I'm asking myself, far past the hot zone of earnings, if we're not certain about what the Federal Reserve is going to do in the next handful of meetings, more specifically September, November, December, if we're not certain, look at the trend in utilities, right? With as much discussion as there's been on a lot of tech stocks, look at the trend on XLP. Utilities and staples continue to outperform. All right. So that is a wrap. As always, gang, thanks for being here for Charts and Coffee. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station. And in the meanwhile, if you want to join us to see, Rog, why did you all take Qualcomm instead of NVIDIA? How did that trade perform? I mentioned that in the video last Friday. That was a roughly $4 option that went to $16. And so those are the kinds of things we're looking at. If those kinds of trades interest you, come check out what we're doing over at sectorsecrets.com. I'll see you tomorrow.